Hello YouTube, welcome to another pre-season 7 League of Legends champion guide. Today we're going to cover Jungle Nidalee.
They will fear the wild.
For more of my content, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/egamingtv or on Twitter at egaming_TV. All of the links for my social medias and the timestamps for this guide will be down in the video description, so make sure you check that out. I do Riot Point giveaways at the end of every month on my Twitter, as well as a poll each night on which champion I should cover the next day. So, if you're interested in entering those Riot Point giveaways, or you want to vote on which champion guide should be next, make sure you head over to Twitter. But now let's hop into Nidalee's pros and cons. She's a champion with a pretty damn strong early game and really solid early ganks, as long of course as she can land her spear. Her pounce ability gives her an absolute ridiculous amount of mobility, and she does have a very fast jungle clear, since she does have a lot of AoE in her kit. She then finally has a very solid gap closer and high early burst, but this of course is only if she can land her javelin toss. Nidalee however is a very weak champion if she does fall behind. Her spears will be doing no damage at all, and if she jumps into a fight, she's just going to die instantly. She then has absolutely no crowd control and is very skill shot reliant, since I have said you have to land your spear multiple times already. She's then pretty mediocre in team fights as well. Now if the team fight can get delayed and she can toss spears at the enemy over and over again, then of course that's a different story. Lastly, she is a pretty mana hungry champion in the beginning, so she really relies on having that blue buff throughout the early game. For my Masteries, I go 12 Ferocity and 18 Cunning, grabbing Thunderlord's Decree as my Keystone Mastery. Your Pounce Swipe Takedown combo in Cougar form is really fast to pull off, and Thunderlord's Decree will add a nice extra burst of damage into that combo. She also honestly doesn't make great use of any other Mastery Keystone out there, so I would only really recommend Thunderlords. Our rune page is a little bit hectic, but we start by taking attack damage reds, scaling health yellows, a mix of scaling cooldown reduction and ability power blues, and then 2 ability power quints and 1 armor quint. So Nidalee is a champion who only gets 30% CDR from her items, so these 6 glyphs of scaling cooldown reduction will give you that extra 10%. We then finish off our glyphs by getting some ability power ones, so we can get 1 quint of armor and not really lose any ability power. This quint of armor will allow us to get those 9 seals of scaling health, so we'll be even tankier in the early game. For your summoner spells, you'll have to grab Smite and Flash. Smite is required on Nidalee to keep her sustained through the jungle, buy her jungler item, and have buff and objective control. Flash is then required because it can save your life multiple times in a single game since you're a rather squishy champion. You can also combo Flash with your Pounce to close a really large gap on an enemy running away, or you can combo it with your Javelin Toss to snipe an enemy far away from you. These are by far the best summoner spells, and I wouldn't recommend taking anything else. Alright, now let's kick off your abilities by looking at our passive, Prowl. Moving through Brush grants Nidalee 10% bonus movement speed for 2 seconds, increasing to 30% if she's moving towards a nearby visible enemy champion. The second part is called Hunt, and hitting monsters or enemy champions with Javelin Toss or Bushwhack marks them as hunted for 4 seconds, causing them to be revealed for the duration. While moving towards hunted targets, Nidalee gains Prowl's bonus movement speed and becomes ghosted. Additionally, Nidalee's first use of Takedown and Pounce against hunted targets are empowered. Now we'll talk about these on their respective pages, but all you need to know is Pounce is the one that allows you to jump right onto an enemy champion after you do hit them with either your spear or Bushwhack. That's why when you're going in for a gank, it's so important to land either your spear or have your Bushwhack on that champion so you can pounce directly on top of them. That's pretty much what your passive is, an easier way to pull off your combo. Alright, so now what we're going to do here, since she does have a human and cougar form of each ability, is go through each Q, then each W, then each E. So for your human form's Q, we have Javelin Toss. Nidalee hurls a javelin forward in a line, dealing magic damage to the first enemy it hits, which after traveling a minimum distance is increased by 1% per 3.875 units traveled, capping at 200% bonus damage. So this ability has the potential to do an absolute ton of damage, but of course you do have to land it from farther, which is obviously harder to do. Whenever I'm going in for ganks, I don't really care about the range too much, because as long as I can land this, I can pull off my Cougar combo, which will in return do a lot more damage than just landing this ability from a farther distance. Whenever you're sieging towers or you're trying to defend an objective, it's also great to just toss these out over and over again and try to chunk the enemy down so they can't even engage. Now Cougar form's Q, Takedown. Nidalee's next basic attack gains bonus range and is modified to deal magic damage, increased by an amount for every 1% of the target's missing health. If the target is marked by Hunt, then Takedown deals 40% increased damage to those targets. Now in our all-in combo, this is of course the one we used last because it will deal the most damage when something is missing some health. We'll be talking about that more in our combo page, but all you need to know for now is Q is easily your best ability, and you have to max it first. Now we'll move on to our W abilities, starting with the human form, Bushwhack. Nidalee lays a trap at the target location, arming after a brief delay and lasting for up to 2 minutes. The next enemy who springs the trap takes magic damage over 4 seconds and is revealed for the duration. So first off, this is your other way of marking the target with Hunt. So this ability does extremely mediocre damage, but it is great to ward the entrances of your jungles and whatnot, so if anybody comes through your bushes, you will be able to see them. Of course, if you are nearby yourself, you can use your enhanced prowl to jump right onto the target. Now your cougar form's W, Pounce. Nidalee dashes a fixed distance in the direction of the cursor, dealing magic damage to enemies around her landing point. For the hunt bonus, Pounce can be used to target nearby hunted targets and gains increased range against them. Killing a unit or dashing to a hunted target reduces Pounce's base cooldown by an amount if currently at a higher one. So this here is what allows you to easily pull off your combos. The range becomes rather large, and as long as the enemy is marked by Hunt, you can pounce right on top of them and easily land your E and Q ability in cougar form. With the cooldown refunded as soon as you do so, you can use your pounce within a relatively short duration again. You can use that to either chase the enemy or escape if you do need to. Bushwhack is not that great of an ability, at least damage wise. We only really need the one early point, so we do max this one last. It's nowhere near as good as our Q and E. Now let's move on to your E abilities, starting with your human form, Primal Surge. Nidalee evokes the Spirit of the Cougar, healing the target allied champion or herself, increased by 1% for every 1% of the target's missing health, and granting them bonus attack speed for 7 seconds. So in short, it's a great way to keep you and your teammates sustained. In the jungle, of course, you can also pop this on yourself to get some health, but the attack speed's also great because your basic attacks will be faster and you can output more damage. At some point in a team fight, you want to make sure you get it on the AD carry because 60% attack speed is quite a bit for an AD carry and can really increase their damage output. Now, Cougar Form's E, Swipe. Nidalee claws at the enemies in an arc in the direction of the cursor, dealing magic damage to all enemies hit. So this is a pretty solid ability because it does have a low cooldown and it does have a pretty decent range, and it is AoE as well. With the AoE damage it provides, it's pretty good for clearing through the jungle, and when you combine it with your W, you do have a pretty solid amount of AoE for clearing through the new jungle. So in the end, the heal from your E is much better than the little AoE damage from your W, so you do max this one second, right behind your Q. Now we're going to look at her ultimate, which is basically just changing forms, but first we're going to start with Aspect of the Cougar. Nidalee transforms herself into a cougar, gaining melee attacks as well as new abilities. Cougar Form's abilities rank up when Aspect of the Cougar does. So that of course means leveling up your Q, W, and E doesn't actually do anything for your Cougar forms of those abilities. They will only actually scale when you do put a point into your ultimate. When you're in Cougar form, of course when you activate it, you just go back into human form, but keep in mind switching into Cougar form does have a 3-second cooldown, so you might not be able to switch back right away. Just like Elise, you do start with a point in this at level 1, and you increase it at 6, 11, and 16, like a normal ultimate. For our skill order, we put a point into our ultimate whenever we can at 6, 11, and 16, since it actually scales your Cougar form abilities. We then focus on maxing our Q first, because it's our only way of actually doing some extra damage in human form. Then we focus on maxing our E second, because it actually has a pretty decent AP ratio, and it can really sustain us when we are sieging towers. Finally, we save our W for last. We just get an early point in the ability so we can trap up the entrances to our jungle and hopefully get hunted on a target. Our main all-in combo starts by hitting the enemy with a javelin toss. We then want to quickly hop into our Cougar form and use our empowered pounce to jump onto the enemy marked with hunted. Then follow up by hitting that enemy with swipe, and then hit the enemy with takedown to finish off the enemy. Takedown does % missing health damage and therefore needs to be the last part of the combo since it will deal the most damage. If the enemy walks over one of your bushwhack traps, then you won't even need to land a spear since the enemy will already be marked as hunted. For my jungle route on Nidalee, I always like to start at blue buff no matter what side I'm on, since she is fairly mana hungry early on. I'll start by killing blue buff, killing Gromp, then wolves, red buff, and finally golems. Razorbeaks are pretty OP early on, so I generally skip them on the first clear because I don't like to dip too low. Now doing this clear will give you level 4, and at this point you can do either a scuttle, gank a lane if it is pushed, or go back and buy. Nidalee is a pretty solid counter jungler since she can steal monsters from a very long distance with her javelin toss and can use her deep wards and bushwhack to keep vision on the enemy jungler. She also has a lot of burst in her spell rotations, which makes stealing monsters even easier, and she can easily kill low health junglers. If Nidalee gets caught in a bad spot in the enemy jungle and the enemy starts rotating for her, she does have a ridiculous amount of mobility and can easily escape by using her pounce to jump over a wall. A good Nidalee is insanely annoying for most junglers to deal with. Nidalee has some pretty solid early game damage and mobility, so her ganks are pretty solid. The one problem though is that she must land her javelin toss in order to easily close a gap on the enemy team. This means Nidalee's ganks can either be super strong or very mediocre, and a lot of it has to do with the allied champions in the lane you're ganking. If your team has some hard crowd controls, then landing your javelin toss will be incredibly easy and the enemy will be destroyed by your gank. If however you're ganking a lane with no forms of crowd control, it's usually going to be rather hard to get off a successful gank unless the enemy is very pushed. Once you land your spear, then pull off the combo on the combos page. Nidalee is a champion who usually struggles in full-on team fights. She can't deal with tanks too well in the later stages of the game, and landing a spear past the front line onto a squishy champion can be pretty hard sometimes. What you'll need to do is try and find a flanking angle and get your javelin toss onto the carries. If you can't find anybody, try to poke the enemy as much as you can with your javelin toss to lower their health pools before the fight even starts. If the enemy team also has poke, then make sure you're sustaining your team with your primal surge. Try and delay the fight as much as you can and bring the enemy's carries health pool low. Having some forms of disengage on Nidalee's team is a great way for her to poke over and over. Now we're going to look at a couple hard matchups, and first up is Hecarim. He's one of the strongest junglers in the current meta and can give Nidalee a lot of problems. His high mobility and high damage from Rampage and Trinity Force allows him to easily duel Nidalee and can counter gank her all day long. Try and keep track of him with deep wards and your bushwhack traps so you can avoid him. You'll only pretty much want to counter gank a Hecarim, unless he's not nearby at all. So second here is Vi, and she's another strong jungler at the moment and has some very high early game damage and excellent mobility. Her Vault Breaker and Assault and Battery are excellent against champions who rely on abusing their mobility, which of course is Nidalee. You'll need to use deep wards and bushwhack traps yet again to keep track of her and focus on counter ganking her lanes. Now we're going to look at two more, and this time we're starting with one of the bug bros, Kha'Zix. Now he's a champion you never want to meet 1v1 anywhere on the map. He's able to easily destroy you in a 1v1 once he has evolved his Taste Their Fear, so you need to make sure you know where he is on the map and don't get into 1v1 situations. Focus on farming, ganking, and counter jungling like normal, but ward your jungle entrance. Next here is Lee Sin, and he can be pretty tough for you, especially early on due to his high damage and high mobility. Even if you're able to pounce over a wall to try and escape from him, he can follow you with either a ward hop or a resonating strike. Try to farm until you hit a power spike and gank when you're needed, but don't try and force anything stupid. Alright, now we arrive at the item build, which starts with a Hunter's Talisman, refillable potion, and a warding totem. For the core build, we'll want to get a Runic Echoes, Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and a Lich Bane. The Runic Echoes gives us some nice early game burst and AoE damage, the Rylai's Crystal Scepter gives us a really nice health pool and a much needed slow, and the Lich Bane really increases our burst. We'll then want to pick up some boots, and we'll want to either get the Ionians, Sork Shoes, or Merc Treads. I almost always get the Ionians because it does give 10% CDR, and with the rest of the items I usually take, it'll get 30, and with the runes we took, boom, 40%. For our item pool, we first have the Void Staff, which is great against the tankier champions with some magic resist, so we can actually do some damage. Then we have the Zonias, which is a great way to get 10% CDR, but it's also a very, very solid defensive pickup with that stasis active. Now if we're going for a very, very high AP build, we could go for the Rabadon's Death Cap as well, since it will give us the most ability power possible. If we really wanted to have a high health pool, then we could get the Rod of Ages early on and get it stacking. It's a pretty decent item as well, but not one I pick up too often. Then we have the Abyssal Scepter, a great way to increase our damage yet again, but also give us some nice magic resist. Hextech Protobelt's a decent item as well that does also give 10% CDR, but I don't pick it up too much myself because we already have a lot of burst and we already have great mobility as well. Then finally there is Guardian Angel, always a fantastic item late game so you can come back to life. For our normal full build though, we take our core, then add the Void Staff to get through that magic resist, and the Zonias for its awesome defensive capabilities. I pretty much take this full build 90% of the time. Sometimes I will get an Abyssal Scepter if there's a high AP team, but other than that, I stick with this normal full build. It is very, very solid. But that, ladies and gentlemen, covers everything I've got for pre-Season 7 Jungle Nidalee. Don't forget to check out the video description below for a link to all my social medias, and make sure you check out my website, egamingtv.com, for a list of all of my champion guides. As always, if you guys did enjoy the video, please thumb it up, and if you are new here, you could also subscribe. But other than that, thank you guys a ton for watching the guide, and I will see you guys in the next champion guide. Peace.